This is Theology on the Go, a brief interview about an eternal truth.
It's a unique book in the way in which it argues for us to be alert to the fact that all of life is spiritual warfare, and that in that spiritual warfare, which he considers on multiple levels, we are well equipped. We have a captain who is invincible. We have armor that provides us with all that we need. We have a sure destination. There's a whole Bible, Christological, heavenly focus that's pretty unique.
Hello and welcome to Theology on the Go. My name is Jonathan Master. I am joined, as always, by friend and co-host James Dolezal. James, how are you today?
I'm doing very well, and looking forward to interviewing a good friend. I think maybe for the third or fourth time on our podcast. So great to have a familiar face and old friend back on the show.
Yes, a frequent guest of Theology on the Go, Chad Van Dixhoorn, who is professor of church history and theology at Reformed Theological Seminary in Charlotte, North Carolina. Chad, thank you for coming on today.
Glad to be back with you both.
We want to talk today about a work that you helped with. It's a translation of Plans for Holy War by John Arrowsmith, and it was translated by David Noe, and you edited it and wrote an introduction. And I'm guessing for many of our listeners, John Arrowsmith's name may not be familiar, and this book may not be familiar. So let's start with him. Who was John Arrowsmith, and why was he a significant figure, and why is he a figure that we should be acquainted with?
Yeah, thank you. John Arrowsmith was an English minister born in 1602 in the east of England. He was an academic for many years in Cambridge, then served as a member of the Westminster Assembly and a London minister, then returned to Cambridge to take on higher academic posts. At the Assembly, he was one of its leading scholars, deeply influential in writing the Confession of Faith. At Cambridge, he was just a well-regarded, hardworking scholar who wrote a number of works, not all of which survived.
Now, this one has survived and has now been translated. Why is Plans for, we'll get into the content and the specifics of it, but just on a big picture level, why is Plans for Holy War worthy of translation and of reintroduction to the church?
Yeah, it's a unique book in the way in which it argues for us to be alert to the fact that all of life is spiritual warfare, and that in that spiritual warfare, which he considers on multiple levels, we are well equipped. We have a captain who is invincible. We have armor that provides us with all that we need. We have a sure destination. There's a whole Bible, Christological, heavenly focus that's pretty unique, and it's easy reading in the sense that he's got a chatty style. He loves to intersperse stories and anecdotes. Yes, he does sometimes deal with some heady theology, which makes us put on sort of our big person hats as we kind of go through that stuff. But it's really just rich, thoughtful, and unique.
Chad, before we get into Arrowsmith's sort of historic contextual reasons for writing this, and particularly the polemical stance that he takes, which I want you to comment on in a second, I wonder if you could even make a few remarks about how to situate this contribution vis-a-vis other, let us say, major 17th century contributions on spiritual warfare. I'm thinking of Richard Gilpin's great work, De Monologia Sacra, Against Satan's Temptations, or Gurnall's very famous work, The Christian in Complete Armor, which comes a little bit later, actually, in the century, I think after Arrowsmith. How does, first of all, this was a kind of literature. This is almost a subgenre. What is Arrowsmith's approach, and how would you compare it, or is that, I hope that's not an unfair question, to some of his contemporaries or successors?
So it strikes me that Arrowsmith is writing a book that's perhaps more alert to theological warfare. So there are books on spiritual warfare which are deeply edifying. They make us think about the heart. Arrowsmith does that, but he is principally saying that the devil's main weapon is to deceive us in the realm of ideas. And that
Heresies.
yeah, heresies, errors, everything else is downstream from that. And so he wants us to think about the bad theological and philosophical ideas that are going to impact the church, its ministers, and then trickling down its members. Uh,
Are there some specific ones in particular that sort of have raised his alarm?
Yeah, so it's the 1650s. So we have the traditional problems of Arminianism, and before that, of course, Roman Catholicism or ongoing Catholicism. He's also very much concerned about Socinianism, with its Arian-esque denials of the doctrine of the Trinity, with its, problems with respect to exegesis and so on. And then he's also very much concerned with the anti-intellectualism and the pseudo-spiritualism of various kinds of enthusiasm, various kinds of what we might call sort of charismatic movements of his day.
But it has its own exotic name in the way that he addresses it.
Well, yeah, his case study, if you will, are the Vegalians, this sect that follows a 16th century guy who was not a phenomenon in the 16th century, but after his works are posthumously recovered, becomes a kind of problem in the 17th century. This kind of anti-intellectual, anti-academic, if you will, to be anachronistic, sort of charismatic figure, which Rutherford thinks is problematic on just a whole bunch of levels.
Is there any parallel in that century to sort of our own times where sometimes those of the anti-intellectual or charismatic bent also set themselves up as having a sort of a more insider knowledge of spiritual warfare? Do you know what I'm talking about? Where I mean,
Yeah,
because he's writing on spiritual warfare, but he's also writing against the enthusiasts.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, as I sort of replay the tape and think about the book, I don't see him criticizing the enthusiasts in particular for missing what we should be thinking about with respect to spiritual warfare. They're just a case in point of what our spiritual warfare needs to engage with. Um, so I think if that question were asked of him, um, he one of the things that he would say is that our sword of the spirit is something which an enthusiast is going to be insufficiently familiar with. He's not going to know how to use the scriptures. He's not going to deploy the scriptures in the way in which they're intended. He's going to be the enthusiast is going to be reaching for the Spirit's help without the Spirit's means.
Mm.
Chad, given the fact that much of what he's focused on has to do with theological heresies, theological errors, and that's the level at which he sees this spiritual war playing out, does that make this book especially relevant to those who are engaged in the task of doing the kind of theological work that he was doing? Obviously, he spent so much of his time in what we would think of as academic circles, although he was also preaching at the same time. But I guess what I'm asking is it written to people in that kind of setting primarily, or would you say, no, this is actually the kind of thing that every Christian should reckon with and think about when they consider the topic of spiritual warfare?
Yeah. So if I think about the book in three parts, I think David and I would both agree that the first part is trying to do two things. First, it's saying, if you look at the Proto-Evangelion, it sets us up to see the scripture through the lens of spiritual warfare.
Enmity.
Yeah, right. And in fact, you can kind of chase that down. So there's a biblical theological theme that runs through part one, gets picked up, especially at the end of part three. But also in part one, he is, I think, really pitching the work, or excuse me, pitching the need to be attentive to and engage in spiritual warfare to ministers and theological professors, and he would say civil magistrates. And then part two, when he begins to expound Ephesians 6, the spiritual armor and so on, that part I think will deeply resonate with Christians more generally. So the opening theme is just such a wonderful lens through which to look at the whole of the Bible. Then he gets into his sort of deeper dive into particular areas, but then part two, the exposition of the armor, is just edifying, easy to follow, warm-hearted, as is part three on prayer. Because, of course, the Apostle Paul leaves off his look at the armor, although Bunyan refers to the prayer, which follows as the weapon of all prayer. But Arrowsmith says, okay, we're done with the armor. Now let's look at prayer, and that constitutes most of part three. So again, very helpful, being encouraged in prayer, directed in prayer, deeply edifying. So yes, this is a book that ought to engage ministers, theological professors. But the first part of the first part, all the second part, all the third part will be really engaging for a regular Christian as well, a thoughtful reading Christian.
Chad, is this a work of Protestant scholasticism, or is that the wrong label to give it?
Yeah, that's a great question, James, and you ask it advisedly. Of all the Westminster Divines that I've read, Arrowsmith's going to be one of those who does continue to deploy some Aristotelian distinctions and so much. He's going to deploy Aristotelian distinctions and so on. But in his opening university lectures, he also really comes down hard on medieval scholasticism and sees the Reformation as a kind of rescue of the church and academy from the worst of that. But at times he seems to be saying that the Reformation is rescuing the church and the academy, not just from the abuses, but from the whole project, if you will, of late medieval scholasticism. His style of writing is nothing like that of, say, Rutherford, who's often offering distinctions, questions, he's disputing, and so on. There's a kind of narratival flow and structure to this book that is not characteristic of other theological works written by Westminster Divines and post-Reformation theologians. So there's something interesting going on here. James, what are your own thoughts as you read it?
I concur with you. Chad, you know me. You know I like an Aristotelian distinction as well as the next man. Well, maybe probably more than the next man. So I even thought of the chapter, you could just say the breastplate of righteousness, but he says the breastplate of dispositional and actual righteousness. And he notes that distinction between dispositional and actual, which is actually a meaningful and important distinction. But then as you read it, it's much more rhetorical and prosy,
Yes.
stylistically, and not so much of the quiescitio method of question answer, very terse, very compacted. So the style is, your point earlier, readable, but some of those textured distinctions do still carry some water for him.
Yeah, but I think that the way in which he writes, the lack of a sort of classroom tone to the book is part of what David so much enjoyed about translating it. It's not Dr. Noe's style to gravitate towards translating a published classroom material. So Rutherford was, Arrowsmith was a real treat for him in that regard.
Chad, getting back to his own day, what do we know about the influence of this book and the reception of this book in its own time?
Yeah, so we do know that we know from a reprint and a new preface to the reprint that the book was much treasured, had become, when it was out of print, it got very expensive. People would hunt for a copy and so on. But it is a Latin work. It was printed twice, and not two, three, four, not three, four, five times. So a kind of widely respected, highly regarded work, but by no means kind of a runaway bestseller, which is interesting. Because I think it's one of the most engaging and pleasant reads that I've come across from a Puritan pen. So certainly a very unique book. So I'm surprised it didn't sell more. We're hoping our edition does better than those two editions.
I was going to say your English translation could do better than both Latin editions.
We hope so, but we don't have the printing statistics for those first two editions. So we'll always be living with the insecurity of not knowing.
Chad, in the time since then and in our own day, obviously both you and David Noe thought that for more than just historical reasons, this was worth getting back into print. Obviously, if someone were just concerned about it from a historical perspective, they could go back and read the Latin. But you're, in a sense, the case you're making is, no, this actually needs to be read today by the 21st century church. So what are kind of two or three or four of the key features be that make it worth make it a worthy contribution to our modern literature?
So I guess the first thing that occurs to me is the first thing that a reader encounters in the book. That is, it's unique and challenging in the way in which it chases down a central theme throughout the whole scriptures and follows that theme throughout the whole book. And that's just thinking about the Bible, God's revelation to us, as a narrative of spiritual warfare in which Christ triumphs, and we in him. So the persistence of theme, the nature of the theme, Christ's triumphant warfare, it just presents a new light or a new lens through which to look at the Bible and to look at Christ's work. That's edifying. That's useful. And a lot of his thoughtful exegesis is challenging. So here's someone who has a Christological lens on the Bible. That's great. His work in part two on spiritual warfare, I think brings more to the fore the way in which sin is not just a matter of the heart and actions, although it certainly is, but also that of the head. We need reminders of that from time to time. And then corresponding with that in the third place, he's a little grumpy about how ministers and professors in his own day are just kind of tired of controversy. And he's saying, well, if the Christian life, if the whole of the church's existence is going to be not just biblical revelation, but the whole of the church's existence is going to be characterized by spiritual warfare, it's not time to spaw. It's time to fight. It's time to be vigilant, and so on. That's a that's a call has value in our day. And then he layers on top of that a model of warfare himself as he combats the various errors of his day and warns about errors that people had not really noticed. He offers an example of of pretty gracious polemics. Um, his vocabulary is moderate, especially for the time. He doesn't exaggerate. He doesn't crowdsource his heresiography. It's just careful, thoughtful, measured, diligent work without all the vitriol. It's a lot of light without a lot of heat. And I think there's something that he does there that's really helpful. And then I guess what am I on? Number 5 or number 6? You asked for a handful. I'm giving you several.
This is good.
I think the final point is his material on prayer at the end is so rich, and so thoughtful and encouraging that given the challenges we face, given the call to action and alertness that he issues, this call to prayer is so well placed because we go in the Lord's strength, relying in his mighty power.
It's really striking because there are certainly theologians and pastors throughout history that recognize that we are in a conflict and that there's a need for being on guard and there's a need for fighting the fights that need to be fought. But he seems to do that. And perhaps I was struck by this because of the final section on prayer, or as you mentioned, his way of doing polemics, that he doesn't come across as a belligerent person eager to sort of spin his opponents in the worst possible way, even though at the same time he's going to say this is what it means to live the Christian life, to be part of this battle that goes back to the fall.
Yeah. And let me sing to the choir here. We need more of that in our day. We need to distinguish between a person's utterances and the worst understanding of those utterances. We need to distinguish between a proposition made by a theologian and all the possible implications of that proposition. Arrowsmith is doing that better than most, and that's a good example for his day and ours.
Was it
Chad,
Samuel Bolton who wrote the treatise on the arraignment of error, sort of instruction on how to carry on a dispute and a disagreement? Would you say Arrowsmith is an exemplar for us, how to pursue that?
Yeah, I think he's my favorite early modern model of how to do that.
That's high praise. That's good.
Chad, thanks for giving us some time today. We are grateful for your many labors along these lines and for giving us a few minutes to talk about Arrowsmith's plans for Holy War.
My pleasure. It's been great. It's been great to chat with you both.
James, I was saying to you and Chad when we ended the recording that I've had this book out in my office for a little while, just as I've been going through it. And the title makes it sound as if it's going to be this extremely aggressive book, Plans for Holy War, How the Spiritual Soldier Fights, Conquers, and Triumphs. And in a sense, it is. It's acknowledging and making the case that since the fall, there's been this enmity and this spiritual battle. But at the same time, I thought the point that he made at the end about the way in which Arrowsmith engages and the undergirding of prayer to the whole enterprise of spiritual warfare is such an important feature of the book. So it's a long book. The beginning part may or may not be appealing to some, but it is, I think, a very valuable book. I'm very grateful that they translated it.
I think an important reminder that this side of glory, that we are engaged in war, and the outcome is life or death, really, and that's no exaggeration. The enmity that is placed between the serpent and the woman and between his seed and her seed is an enmity that will rage on until the summing up of all things. I think our modern sensibility thinks that that is somehow inherently not the way that it should be, and that we should work to, as it were, avoid conflict at all costs. But Jesus said, "Do not think I came to bring peace upon the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword." And then he says that sword's gonna set even family members against each other. I sometimes tell my students this is a kind of enmity and a conflict that if you don't get into it on the right side, you are in it. It's not a question of whether you're in this conflict. You are ranked behind Christ or ranked behind the devil, fighting this war. And I think a book like this is a good reminder, and also some good strategy on how to wage this war, particularly in the realm of ideas and doctrines. That not everything needs to be bunker buster bombs. There's the place for the sharpshooter that knows how to very skillfully hit the mark without excessive collateral damage. Sometimes you and I have both probably read books like that are polemical, but they are they're damaging beyond what was needed to achieve the victory. So it's really great to have an historical model and then think about how we might in our own day carry on that contest winsomely, but also ardently and skillfully.
Yeah, we tend toward extremes where we either say we're in a battle, which is absolutely right and biblical. We have to say that, and therefore, we can engage in it in a way that's using the world's methods and not following the scriptures, or we go the other direction and say, no, actually, we're just all about sort of peace and getting along, and there is no conflict here, or at least the conflict is sort of on the margins. And he is emphatically against both of those approaches. I would say the battle is not marginal. The battle is at the fundamental core ideas and at fundamental core behaviors. It really is a stark line that he draws, and yet he points us toward the way in which the scriptures would have us defend ourselves and assert ourselves.
There's a way to do it that adorns the gospel and one that brings disrepute to the gospel. And it's good to have a book that shows us how to be aggressive and militant in a way that adorns the gospel and seeks the salvation of the lost.
Well, if you would like to enter your information for a chance to win a copy of this book, Plans for Holy War, published by our friends at RHB, you can go to theologyonthego.org or placefortruth.org, and there's a spot there for you to enter your information. We do have a few of these copies. It's a big book. And if you know someone who would benefit from this particular episode or from the podcast in general, please pass it along. And if you can rate and review the podcast wherever it is that you download it, that would take a few seconds of your time and would help us spread the word. And then if you're able to donate directly to the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals, you can do that at alliancenet.org or placefortruth.org. As always, thank you for listening to Theology on the Go, a brief interview about an eternal truth.